Hey there, have you ever found yourself in a situation where you made a decision that you later regretted? Maybe you said something in the heat of the moment that hurt someone's feelings, or perhaps you rushed into a financial decision without fully considering the consequences. We've all been there, and it's a universal human experience. But what if I told you that there's a way to minimize those regrets and make wiser choices in life? You see, the key to making better decisions is to think before you act. It sounds simple, but in practice, it can be incredibly challenging. We live in a world that moves at a breakneck pace, and we're constantly bombarded with distractions and demands on our time and attention. It's easy to get caught up in the moment and react impulsively without taking the time to consider the potential outcomes of our actions. But here's the thing, every decision we make has consequences, whether we realize it or not. Even the smallest choices can have a ripple effect that impacts our lives in ways we never could have imagined. That's why it's so important to cultivate the habit of thinking before we act. So how do we do that? Well, the first step is to become more mindful of our thoughts and emotions. When we're faced with a decision, it's easy to get caught up in our initial gut reaction. We might feel angry, excited, or afraid, and those emotions can cloud our judgment and lead us to make impulsive choices. Instead, we need to take a step back and observe our thoughts and feelings without getting attached to them. We can do this through practices like mindfulness meditation, which helps us to develop a greater awareness of our inner world. When we're able to see our thoughts and emotions more clearly, we can make decisions from a place of clarity and wisdom rather than being driven by our impulses. Another key aspect of thinking before we act is to consider the long-term consequences of our choices. It's easy to get caught up in the short-term benefits of a decision without fully considering how it might impact our lives down the road. For example, we might be tempted to buy something we can't really afford because it's on sale without thinking about how it will affect our financial stability in the long run. To avoid this trap, we need to develop a habit of looking beyond the immediate gratification of our choices and considering their potential long-term impacts. We can do this by asking ourselves questions like, how will this decision affect me a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? By taking a longer-term perspective, we can make choices that are aligned with our values and goals rather than just satisfying our immediate desires. Of course, thinking before we act doesn't mean that we should become paralyzed by indecision. There will always be some level of uncertainty in life, and we can't predict the future with 100% accuracy. But by taking the time to consider our options and weigh the potential outcomes, we can make more informed and intentional choices. One tool that can be helpful in this process is a decision-making framework. There are many different frameworks out there, but one of the most popular is the pros and cons list. Essentially, this involves writing down the potential benefits and drawbacks of each option and then weighing them against each other to see which choice makes the most sense. Another framework that can be useful is the 10-10-10 rule. This involves asking yourself how you'll feel about a decision in 10 minutes, 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years. By considering the short-term, medium-term, and long-term impacts of our choices, we can make decisions that are more likely to stand the test of time. Ultimately, the key to making wiser decisions is to cultivate a habit of mindfulness and intentionality in our lives. When we're able to slow down, tune into our inner wisdom, and consider the potential outcomes of our choices, we're much more likely to make decisions that are aligned with our values and lead to greater happiness and fulfillment in the long run. But developing this habit isn't always easy. It requires a willingness to step outside of our comfort zones and challenge our habitual ways of thinking and behaving. It means being honest with ourselves about our motivations and biases and being open to feedback and alternative perspectives. One way to start cultivating this habit is to practice self-reflection on a regular basis. Take some time each day to sit quietly and observe your thoughts and emotions without judgment. Notice any patterns or tendencies that arise and consider how they might be influencing your decision-making process. Another helpful practice is to seek out the advice and perspective of others. When we're faced with a difficult decision, it can be incredibly valuable to talk it through with someone we trust, whether that's a friend, family member, or mentor. By getting an outside perspective, we can often see things more clearly and make a more informed choice. Ultimately, the journey towards making wiser decisions is a lifelong one. There will always be challenges and obstacles along the way, and we'll inevitably make mistakes and face setbacks. But by cultivating a habit of mindfulness, intentionality, and self-reflection, we can gradually become more skillful in navigating the complexities of life and making choices that lead to greater happiness, fulfillment, and success. So the next time you find yourself facing a decision, whether big or small, take a moment to pause and think before you act. Ask yourself what truly matters to you and consider the potential outcomes of each option. Seek out the wisdom and perspective of others and trust in your own inner guidance. By doing so, you'll be well on your way to making wiser choices and living a more authentic and purposeful life. Of course, thinking before we act isn't always easy, especially in the heat of the moment. Our emotions can be powerful drivers of our behavior, and it's not always possible to put them aside entirely. But by developing a greater awareness of our emotional states and learning to respond rather than react, we can make more intentional choices even in challenging situations. One tool that can be helpful in this regard is the stop technique. This involves taking a moment to stop, take a breath, observe what's happening in our minds and bodies, and then proceed with intentionality. By creating even a brief pause between stimulus and response, we give ourselves the opportunity to make a more thoughtful choice. Another helpful practice is to cultivate a sense of self-compassion. When we make a decision that doesn't turn out as we hoped, it's easy to beat ourselves up and dwell on our mistakes. But by treating ourselves with kindness and understanding, we can learn from our experiences and move forward with greater wisdom and resilience. Ultimately, the path to making wiser decisions is a journey of self-discovery and growth. It requires a willingness to be honest with ourselves, to challenge our assumptions and biases, and to embrace the discomfort that comes with stepping outside of our comfort zones. But by doing so, we open ourselves up to a world of possibility and potential. When we make choices that are aligned with our deepest values and aspirations, we experience a sense of purpose and meaning that goes beyond the fleeting pleasures of instant gratification. We become more authentic and empowered individuals, capable of creating positive change in our own lives and in the world around us. So if you find yourself at a crossroads, unsure of which path to take, remember to think before you act. Take a moment to connect with your inner wisdom, to consider the potential outcomes of each choice, and to seek out the guidance and support of others. By doing so, you'll be well on your way to making decisions that lead to greater happiness, fulfillment, and success in all areas of your life. And remember, the journey towards wiser decision-making is not a destination, but a lifelong process of learning and growth. There will be ups and downs, successes and setbacks, but by staying committed to the path of intentionality and self-reflection, you'll gradually become more skillful in navigating the complexities of life and making choices that are truly aligned with your highest aspirations. So embrace the journey, trust in the process, and know that every decision you make, no matter how small, has the power to shape the course of your life in profound and meaningful ways. By thinking before you act, you open yourself up to a world of limitless possibility and potential, and set yourself on the path towards a more authentic, fulfilling, and purposeful life. As we navigate the twists and turns of life, it's important to remember that our decisions are not made in a vacuum. Every choice we make has a ripple effect that extends far beyond ourselves, impacting the lives of those around us in ways we may never fully understand. That's why it's so crucial to cultivate a sense of empathy and consideration for others in our decision-making process. When we make choices that are purely self-interested, without regard for the needs and well-being of others, we create a world that is more divided, more disconnected, and less compassionate. But when we take the time to consider the impact of our actions on those around us, we create a world that is more harmonious, more cooperative, and more filled with love and understanding. Of course, this doesn't mean that we should always prioritize the needs of others above our own. There is a balance to be struck between self-care and selflessness, and it's important to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves in order to be able to show up fully for others. But by cultivating a greater sense of empathy and consideration in our decision-making process, we can make choices that benefit not only ourselves, but the world around us as well. One way to cultivate this sense of empathy is to practice active listening. When we're faced with a decision that impacts others, it's important to take the time to truly hear and understand their perspectives and concerns. This means setting aside our own biases and assumptions and approaching the conversation with an open mind and a willingness to learn. By actively listening to others, we gain a deeper understanding of their needs, their fears, and their hopes for the future. We begin to see the world through their eyes and to understand the ways in which our choices might impact them in ways we hadn't previously considered. And with this greater understanding comes a greater sense of responsibility to make choices that are truly in the best interest of all involved. Another way to cultivate empathy in our decision-making process is to practice forgiveness. When we've made a choice that has caused harm or pain to others, it's easy to become defensive or dismissive, to try to justify our actions or minimize their impact. But by practicing forgiveness, both for ourselves and for others, we create a space for healing, growth, and transformation. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing harmful behavior or letting others off the hook for their actions. But it does mean recognizing that we are all imperfect, that we all make mistakes, and that we all have the capacity to learn, grow, and change. By extending forgiveness to ourselves and others, we create a more compassionate and understanding world, one in which we can move forward together with greater wisdom and grace. Ultimately, the path to making wiser decisions is not just about thinking before we act, but about cultivating a deeper sense of empathy, compassion, and consideration for others. It's about recognizing that our choices have the power to shape the world around us, and that by making choices that are truly in the best interest of all involved, we create a world that is more equitable and more filled with love and understanding. So as you navigate the complexities of life and face the many decisions that come your way, remember to think not just of yourself, but of the world around you. Take the time to listen deeply, to consider multiple perspectives, and to make choices that are truly in the best interest of all involved. By doing so, you'll not only make wiser decisions for yourself, but you'll also contribute to creating a world that is more compassionate, more connected, and more filled with possibility and potential. Of course, cultivating this sense of empathy and consideration for others is not always easy, especially in a world that often prioritizes individual success and achievement above all else. It can be tempting to view life as a zero-sum game in which one person's gain necessarily comes at another's expense. But this mindset is ultimately limiting and self-defeating, as it fails to recognize the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. In reality, we are all part of a larger web of relationships and interdependencies, and our individual well-being is intimately tied to the well-being of those around us. When we make choices that benefit others, we create a rising tide that lifts all boats, and we contribute to a world that is more abundant, more generous, and more filled with opportunity and possibility. So how can we cultivate this sense of interconnectedness in our decision-making process? One powerful tool is the practice of gratitude. When we take the time to reflect on all the ways in which we are supported, nourished, and uplifted by the people and the world around us, we begin to see ourselves as part of a larger whole rather than as isolated individuals. By cultivating a deep sense of gratitude for all the blessings in our lives, we naturally become more attuned to the needs and well-being of others. We begin to see the ways in which our choices can have a positive impact on the world around us, and we become more motivated to make decisions that are truly in the best interest of all involved. Another powerful tool for cultivating interconnectedness is the practice of service. When we dedicate ourselves to serving others, whether through volunteering, activism, or simply by offering a helping hand to those in need, we begin to see the world through a lens of compassion and empathy. We recognize that our own well-being is intimately tied to the well-being of those around us, and we become more committed to making choices that benefit the greater good. Of course, the path to making wiser decisions is not always a straight line. There will be times when we are faced with difficult choices, when the right path is not always clear, and when we must navigate competing priorities and conflicting values. In these moments, it's important to remember that there is rarely a single right answer, but rather a spectrum of possibilities that we must carefully consider and weigh. One helpful framework for navigating these complex decisions is the three-question test developed by author and philosopher Peter Singer. This test involves asking ourselves three simple questions before making a choice. Does this action minimize suffering? Does this action promote well-being? And is this action fair and just? By using this framework as a guide, we can begin to cut through the noise and confusion of complex decisions and focus on what truly matters most. We can make choices that are grounded in our deepest values and aspirations, and that contribute to a world that is more compassionate, more equitable, and more filled with meaning and purpose. Ultimately, the journey towards making wiser decisions is a lifelong one, and there will always be more to learn and discover along the way. But by cultivating a deep sense of empathy, compassion, and consideration for others, and by staying committed to the path of intentionality and self-reflection, we can gradually become more skillful in navigating the complexities of life and making choices that are truly aligned with our highest aspirations. So as you go forth into the world, remember to think before you act, to consider the impact of your choices on those around you, and to make decisions that are grounded in your deepest values and aspirations. By doing so, you'll not only make wiser choices for yourself, but you'll also contribute to creating a world that is more compassionate and more filled with possibilities for us all. And remember, the power to make a difference lies within each and every one of us. Every choice we make, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant, has the potential to create ripples of positive change that extend far beyond ourselves. By staying true to our values, by acting with integrity and compassion, and by always striving to make the wisest choices possible, we can become powerful agents of transformation in our own lives and in the world around us. So let us go forth with courage and conviction, knowing that every decision we make has the power to shape the future in profound and meaningful ways. Let us think before we act, and act with wisdom, compassion, and grace. And let us never forget the incredible potential that lies within each and every one of us to create a world that is more just, more equitable, and more filled with love and understanding for all.